Okay, so today we will start off looking at Moshe's personal interpretation of the laws, along with of the first Pesach, to be specific, along with some detailed description of the events that took place during that first Pesach, as given by Moshe. And we will finish being back on track looking at the law. We will be moving back and forth because there are places where Moshe gives the law, there are places where he gives his interpretation of the law, and then there are places where he's giving details of what's going on at that time. So we do really need to keep these things separated out so that we're not passing off his interpretation as the law itself. His interpretation should help us to understand the law. It's not a law. And his giving examples of, in detail of what's going on is certainly not law. So we need to keep that stuff separate. So anyway, as it is our custom, please stand and cover yourselves for the reading of our scriptures today. Let's see if I can get this over me. Whoops. I was really covered. Okay. And for those of you who do not know, I'm tethered to wiring and stuff like that, so I am not able to stand. And for those of you who also don't know, standing and covering yourself is not a law given by God, or even anyone else. It's not a law. But it's a tradition and a custom that we like to follow, and I just simply can't. So here's our first one. We're picking up today with Shemot, or Exodus, chapter 12, verse 25. It says, V'haya ki tavo'u et ha'aretz asher yiten Yahweh lachem ka'asher diber u'shemartem et ha'avodah azot. The next verse, 26, V'haya ki yomru alechem b'nechem ma ha'avodah ha'zot lachem. The next verse, 27, Va'amartem zevach Pesach hula Yahweh asher pasach al batai, rather, v'nei Yisrael b'mitzrayim v'nagpo et Mitzrayim again, ve'et ba'atenu hitzil ba'yikod ha'am va'yishtachavu. 42. We're going to jump all the way to 42 because everything in between is either explanation or detail. It is not law. Though we will go through the verses, don't worry. So we pick back up with our actual verses. We'll be studying word by word at Shemot, or Exodus 12, 42. It says, Leil shi nurim hu la Yahweh lehotziam me'aretz Mitzrayim hu halayla hazeh la Yahweh shi nurim lechol b'nei Yisrael ledorotam. And yes, our final one is the next verse, 43. Yahweh el Moshe ve'Aaron zot chukat ha-Pesach kol ben nahar lo ohal bo. All right, so you may be seated. Boy, I was wrapped up in that thing. Okay, so as I said before, we are continuing on now with Moshe's interpretation of these laws. Our first verse, as I also said, is Shemot, or Exodus 12:25. Literally in English, it translates, and that be, or shall come they to the land that given Yahweh to you, as that said, and keep you at the service the this. That's funny, that should be there. That's the Hebrew word. Anyway, we'll have to look at every word, right? So it says, V'haya. Literally, that's and that be, or and the be, which doesn't make any sense in English, right? Well, it's and it will be, it will come to pass. That's all they're saying. Then it says ki, which that word in Hebrew translates roughly in English as the word if. It could be for or because. It's either interrogatory, if you will. It's if this, then that. Or it just means because. We will see as the sentence develops. Then it says tavovu. Literally, that shall go they. So it's to come into a place, to enter a place, to go out of a place, to exit a place. Because in Hebrew, to go and to come are exactly the same thing. Because no matter where you go, you come to the place that you went. That make any sense? It should. All right, so you guys get the idea. It's to go from one place to another, and it's really more about the arrival than it is the journey. So then the next word is El. El is a sound-alike word. It is used of El as in the mighty hero, so they use it of God, or it's two. And in this case, it's two. It's a noun. It's properly, it's indicative of motion. What? A noun with action? Well, you see, a noun and a verb, that's kind of an English thing. Yeah, in fact, it is an English thing. They don't have, literally, nouns and verbs in Hebrew. Now, I know some of you are saying, Robert, don't think about it. In Hebrew, we have words that we think of as nouns in English, right? Shepherd. But it's also used as a verb, right? To shepherd in English. So you're either a shepherd or you are shepherding, right? But so the word is either used as a noun or it's used as a verb. In Hebrew, a shepherd shepherds. There is no difference. So it's not a noun, it's not a verb. It's literally a noun of action. Anyway, hopefully that makes some sense. Then our next word is haaretz, the land. Ha is the, aretz, the land. They speak of the Bible when it's translated into English. They speak of it as the earth, the orbis, the globe, the roundy thing, opposite of the heavens. They'll say, and it's the land, the continent, opposite of the sea, the country. It's a piece of land and that kind of stuff. Oh, yeah, I don't really agree with that. I think that we've made it more than what it really is. Because in Judaism, in the Bible, if you will, the land is the place where you are. So you're in the land of Egypt, or you're in the land of Israel. We currently are in the land of Texas, as opposed to the land of the United States. Isn't it funny? In the last few years, there have been a lot of people in Texas saying, hey, it's time for us to secede from the Union. And boy, particularly people in California, that's just crazy talk. Nobody ought to be saying that. It's really funny because you're hearing it a lot out of California now. We need to secede from them. Anyway, Texas is a country all to itself. I'm just saying. But I think that it's just too broad. We can say it's used of the earth because he created the heavens and the earth. That you could say that, but how would that differ from he created the heavens and the land? Just saying. Our next word is asher, which means which or that. He which took the book. He that took the book. Which or that. It's those two words. Then it says yiten, so it's the masculine of given. He gave, or he has given. When God said he would give you the land, even if it takes 4,000 years, he's already done it, right? Because when God says it, it's done. So it's to give, but it's to cause to receive. If God says he's going to give you something, you will receive it. Not so much from a guy who offered us some money one time, told us he was going to give us a boatload of money. Then he actually opened up the case and showed us what I assume was a boatload of money. I think a boat, it would have been a very small boat, but it's like $20,000 or something like that in cash. I never saw the guy again. He just showed us the money, closed it up, said he'd give it to us later. He didn't cause us to receive. Anyway, that's the you know what giving is. I don't have to tell you that. And the following word is Yahweh. And Yahweh is God's name. It's the only name he has. He does not have 71 names or 99 names or 150 names. He has attributes. He is God the provider. He is God of peace. He is God of all these things. But that's his attributes. He only has one name. And it's not Jehovah. Oh, Lordy, Lord, Lord. It is not Jehovah. What they did was they took the name of God. At some point, I was taught when I was in college that it began in the Dark Ages. And I actually have books over here on the shelf written by scholars that said it began in the Dark Ages. And now I'm seeing books saying that it began as early as the first century. So who knows? But I think they're saying it began in the first century because these letters of the apostles that were supposedly written in the first century, none of which we have from the first century. We only have things from the fourth century in this direction. And then they're not translated into the Greek text. We did not have until the 1100s, the Dark Ages. And so when we used to know that that it began in the Dark Ages, now it's suddenly been shoved all the way back to the first century. Very weird way that happened. And I think that's all that amounts to. So I really don't think it existed in that time period, because you explained to me how the people that were in these stories of the first century knew God's name. Servants from foreign lands knew God's name. How would they know it if nobody ever pronounced it? The reason why I bring that up is because every once in a while I try to bring up the fact that nobody who wrote the Bible had a problem with anybody saying God's name. It did not exist in the time of Moshe. That problem of saying God's name didn't exist in his lifetime. It did not exist during the lifetime of David. It did not exist during the lifetime of Hosea. None of those guys cared. They all said God's name. They wrote God's name. Foreign kings and foreign slaves knew God's name and pronounced it out loud. It's not until you get to either the first century or until the Dark Ages, as I propose, that this superstition began. And it is a superstition. If God's name is so holy that we cannot say it, then God's book is so holy we can't read it. I'm just saying. You can't argue that. By that logic, you can't even read God's word. And if you can't read God's word, you sure can't live by his law. Because nobody teaches his law by memory. They teach man's law by memory. Right? Because the oral law is not God's law. It's not even remotely God's law. It didn't come along until way after the fact. And just because they say that it started at Sinai, where's your evidence? You don't have it. You'll never find it because it wasn't there. God didn't give a written law that nobody should live by and an oral law that everybody needed to live by. Come on. What kind of nonsense is that? I'm just saying. And again, I'm saying all this because I say God's name the way it was probably the closest way we know that it was pronounced. But the truth is, nobody that's alive today was there when Moshe pronounced that name for the first time for everyone to hear. Nobody. And I don't care who you are. I don't care what education you have. I don't care where you come from or where you live in the world. Nobody in the world today knows how God's name was truly pronounced. Nobody. Our best guess is Yahweh. We know it wasn't Yahweh because there is no W sound in the Hebrew language. There never has been, although now they're trying to invent one in modern times. But it didn't exist in biblical times, for sure. It didn't exist until lately. It didn't exist until the Germans started using the W because the W in their language makes the V sound, as in Yahweh with a W. But it got slanged into English as Yahweh. It's not, his name is not Yahweh. It never was. It will never be. The Jehovah thing, getting back to that, what they did was take the vowel pointings out of the word Adonai, the word for Lord, and put it in the name of Yahweh. And you look at them and say, hey, that doesn't pronounce out as Yahweh. Well, of course it doesn't. When you take those vowel pointings to try to force them into God's name, you have to change the vowel pointing. So it comes out Yehovah, which slangs and slurs to Jehovah. So the Jehovah's Witnesses, no. They're wrong. They do not know how to pronounce God's name. They never did. They got it no earlier than the 12th century when that nonsense started. Again, Dark Ages. Okay, so let's not get hung up on that. Let's not go around condemning me to hell because I'm saying God's name as closely as it could possibly be stated. So the next word is lachem. That just means to you. This is ka'asher. It literally as that. So they're saying these words as, well, because it's word, diber is your next word, spoken, the words that were spoken, setting in a row, ranging in order. These aren't just words that are just coming off the top of your head and you're just spitting them out like I'm doing right now. No, these are words that are thought out and put, because, there's some people you get around, that you shouldn't talk politics with them. And if, for whatever reason, you have to talk politics with them, good and well, you have to be careful how you talk about the politics. I ran into this just yesterday. I knew the guy was a Democrat. I knew he was crazy about what's going on, and he wanted to talk politics, and by golly, he wasn't going to give up until I spoke some politics with him. So I had to debar. I had to range my words in order. I had to lead him and guide him with my words. That's what this word means. So it shows somebody not necessarily showing wisdom, but somebody, because it could be used of a child. You know how a child wants something and they go to mommy and they go in this long-winded, roundabout way trying to show mommy why it would be a good thing to give them a chocolate milk and cookies before they go to bed. It's the same thing. They're arranging the words in order. Anyway, our next word is shematem. So you have and keep you, literally. So it's and you keep. So to keep, to watch, to guard. In a narrow sense, as of a garden. So a man who keeps a garden, well, first he's got to prepare the land. If it's a really big garden, he's going to have to get his tractor and his little thing he pulls behind his tractor, and he's going to have to, you know, get rid of the rocks and turn the ground under, and get rid of as much of the weeds as he can. Eventually, he's going to have to plant some seed. And eventually, he's going to have to water, keep in a garden. So in a small sense, maybe you get a pot. You have to get some potting soil and you put it in there, and then you notice that there's little weeds that grow up, so you pluck the weeds. You keep the garden, right? Although I don't know if one plant would be considered a garden. Just saying. So it's of the man tending to his garden. In a wider sense, it's to keep safe, preserve. Often used of God as in guarding men. To preserve, to observe. To keep a law would be to observe it, right? So it's used in a lot of different ways, if you will, but you get the idea. The pseudo points out that we are to keep the easy service of Yahweh, because we're being told we have to keep this service. And he's saying, hey, we're supposed to keep this easy service of Yahweh instead of the hard service of Egypt. Isn't that great? He also pointed out that Moshe did not give instructions for future Pesach celebrations at this point. So we're still talking about the first Pesach. We haven't moved on to the future Pesachs. Next word is et. It's just a pointer. It has no meaning. This is ha-avodah. So avodah is from the root eved, which is a servant. And this, of course, is going to be what a servant does, avodah. So how are you going to keep this service? It's a labor, it's a work, it's an office. It's especially it's a sacred service used particular in sacred ceremonies. So it's a ceremony. So if you think about Pesach and people who follow the Haggadah and they get their table all set up and they put their tablecloth on it and all their fine china and all that kind of stuff, because it's a big deal with a lot of Jews, and they do that. They prepare days and weeks on end for this kind of thing for some of them. And so they get it all set up, and then they go through this step-by-step procedure and read things and sing things, and eat things at a specific time. So this is the service. Everybody does it a little different. Not everybody does it the same way. And there is no law about how the service is to be kept. The law is that you keep the service. All right. So then it says hazot, the this, so keep this service. So the translation, and again, we're at Shemot or Exodus 12:25, but here's the translation. And it will come to pass, for you shall come to the land which Yahweh has given you. It will come to pass because you will get there. As he has spoken, you shall keep this service. Again, it's not the law that you will keep the service. This is his interpretation of it. And he's saying, look, God said it. It's going to happen. Now, Rashi and even Ezra both claim that Pesach was only to start when the children of Israel entered the promised land. They argued that the first Pesach in Mizraim, or in Egypt, and the other one mentioned in Bamidbar, that's Numbers, were that were celebrated. He said those two Pesach, the one in Bamidbar, Numbers, it was celebrated in the second year after they left Mitzrayim. They said that one and the first one were somehow totally different than all the rest of them. And they think that because there's no mention of it happening every single year they were in the wilderness, that equates to it not happening. It's ludicrous. What should have been seen by Bamidbar, by Numbers, is that the children of Israel have celebrated the Pesach every year since Mitzrayim. The absence in not mentioning the Pesach does not equate to the absence in celebrating it. It simply doesn't. The absence of truth doesn't make something a lie. It doesn't make it truth, but it doesn't make it a lie either. What is being said here? I can sum it all up. Just as God said, you shall keep this service. This is what Moshe was saying. Just as God said, you will keep this service, so shall you make it into the land of Mitzrayim. God said it. It's going to happen. So how would you apply it? Well, when we come to a place in our lives that we finally realize that God has blessed us with a home, we should show our gratitude by celebrating his Pesach. Even if we do not live in the land of Israel, we should be able to see around us and realize that God has given us a good land. He has provided well for us. That's what this is about. It's not about where you are. It's about celebrating the fact that God has delivered you and giving you something good. All right. So we move on to our next verse, and again, this is still interpretation of the law. It's not the law, which of course it's Shemot or Exodus 12:26. Literally in English, and that be when say they to you, children you, what the service of this to you? You can kind of get that one, can't you? Via he, and it will come to pass, or because Yomru, he said they. It's a model. There's your word. But you put the yod in the front and the u at the end, it becomes Yomru. If you can see the actual Hebrew word, you can see Amar in it, so you get it. But it's to say, the primary signification is to bear forth. It's to shed light on the subject. So, when they say to you, Alechem, to you, B'nai Chem, when they, who are the they? Your children. B'nai Chem, B'nai, your children. When they say to you, Ma, not hey Ma, as opposed to Pa. Might have to be a Texan to understand that joke. No, Ma is the Hebrew word for what or who. This is ha avodah. Remember that was the service. What the service la hazot the this lahem to you? What is this service to you? So here's the translation. And it will come to pass when your sons say to you, what is this service to you? Now, the Sepharno, Rashbam, and even Ezra all said that our children will ask this question because they will be confused by the special restrictions added by this feast. Okay, this verse does not contain a prophecy of the future. In other words, this it's not saying this is what your children will say. You'll just be sitting there and just all of a sudden one of your English speaking, non-Hebrew speaking children will say, Ma ha'adav hazot lachem. Really? I'm just saying. It's not saying that. This is not prophecy about what they're saying. Remember, it's an idiomatic language. So how do we apply this? Well, come on now. This is Moshe's way of telling us that we need to involve our children, not only in participating in this feast, but also in the conversation concerning the feast. It's a teaching opportunity for us to our children. That's all he's saying. All right, so our next verse, Shemot, or Exodus 12:27, literally in English, and say you, sacrifice Pesach to Yahweh that passed on houses, children Yisrael in Mitzrayim, in striking he Mitzrayim and houses us delivered, and he bowed down, and the people and he worshiped him. And I realize most people wouldn't give a literal translation that way because I'm putting the masculine, I'm writing the word he, and all of that kind of stuff. But I do think that when you're learning the Hebrew language, you need to learn to think of it this way. It'll help you to think in Hebrew. You're never going to speak Hebrew if you don't learn to think in Hebrew. Just saying. So our next word here is va'amatem. It's and say you, or and you will say. And so your response is going to be. It's the primary signification is to bear forth, to bring it to light, to shed light on the subject. So here's your response. Zevach. That's the word for sacrifice, slain. It's the flesh of a slain animal. Because in their day, these children would have seen their parents literally kill this animal, cut it up, and cook it. It's a barbecue. So if they would have said barbecue, it wouldn't be so scary. I'm just saying. So we're talking about the barbecue, what? Pesach. It's the Pesach or the Passover barbecue. And the Passover is, or Pesach, it's a sparing. It's immunity from penalty and calamity. I think this is more art imitating life here because I think what they're doing is putting meaning in here that's connecting to what they believe the Pesach is rather than giving you the meaning of the word Pesach. Because they go on to say it's a sacrifice offered on account of the sparing of the people, the Paschal lamb. No, that's art imitating life. It's to pass over, literally. Why do they call it Passover? The word who it means he or it. This is La Yahweh, so it is to Yahweh. Asher, Pasach. The word is the same. It's Pasach every time, but I change it and put Pesach because it's what we call the name of the feast itself, and I make it different so you can hear the difference. Pesach, you connect to the feast. Pasach is the passing over. And by passing over, you spare. But I still think that the Pasach is just a Passover, and that's all it really means. By God passing over the people that night who spared their lives. Yes, but that does not change the meaning of Pasach to sparing. I hope that makes some sense. Then it says, passed over all, or passed over upon, Bate, he passed over, he passed the houses over. The bate is house, Bate is houses. And remember, in their case, this word is a movable house. It's used of a tent. It's used of a royal house, a palace, or a fortress. Used of the house of God, the temple. And later they stopped calling it the house of Yahweh and began to call it the house. So they were, if you're a Christian, You should know when you're reading the New Testament, when it says they were in the house, you should know they're not in some guy's house and stepping out in his front yard. There's 5,000 people standing in his front yard. And out of that 5,000, 3,000 of them decided to go get baptized to become Christians. No, you shouldn't see that. What you should see is, when they call it the house, is that they're at the temple, which would explain why when they came out of one of the upper rooms in the temple, down into the square, there would be thousands of people in the front yard. I'm just saying, because they're on the Temple Mount. Then it says B'nai, that's and children. Yisrael, Yisrael, that's kind of slurring to Yis instead of Yis. Yisrael. Then it's Be Mitzrayim. So passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Mitzrayim, in Egypt. Couldn't get Egypt out. And then it says Et, which is appointed. And it says Mitzrayim, the Et Beitenu, and the houses us. So God did not pass over the houses of the Egyptians. They died. The firstborn died. He passed over the houses of the children of Israel. Then it says he zeal and delivered. He drew away the destroyer, if you will. He drew away the destroyer from the places that had the blood on the doorposts and the lintel. This is valued gold. And so after Moshe said, you'll say this, you're to have conversations with your children, explain to them what this is and why it's so important. Then after he says all that, he's now giving detail. It says valued gold, and everyone bowed down. They laid flat on their faces on the ground. They prostrated themselves. That's what that means. And it says ha'am, the people laid flat on the ground. This is and worship. That's to bow oneself down, to sit down, to lay flat on the ground. They worship God after they heard these words from Moshe. So, the translation of Shemot, Exodus 12:27. And you will say, it is the Pesach service to Yahweh, which passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Mitzrayim, when he struck the Mitzrayim and delivered our houses. But you don't have to say, and all the people bowed down and worshiped. That's not part of it. And by the way, this isn't a quote. God is not saying you literally have to say, this is the, passing over of God and sparing of it. He's not telling you to quote it. He's telling you to bring it to light, to shed light on the subject for your children. Make sure your children understand what you're doing and why. That's what you're to say to your children. All right, there should be a point in our celebration of the Pesach when we all realize that God delivered all of his children from Mitzrayim. All of us, right down to everyone who's alive today. He delivered us all. Because if he had not, we'd probably all still be there. He delivered us all. At some point, we need to realize this in this service. And in that moment, that would be a good moment for us to have the same reaction those people had, and us all bow down and worship God. You don't have to. It's not a law. I'm just saying it would be a good thing. So then we move on. We're gonna work our way through verses 28 through 41. I'm not going to go through the words now. I'm just giving you my translation of the verses. I never give other people's translations. If I give other people's translations, I will tell you. So if I forget to tell you, you can assume that it was translated by myself, because I translate all this stuff. I just don't trust the translations of dead people. Sorry, I just don't. Or for that matter, people I don't know. I just don't trust anyone else's. So we're going to start in Shemot, or Exodus 12, verse 28. We're going to work our way through 24. Verse 28, this is my translation. And the children of Israel went away and did that which Yahweh commanded Moshe and Aharon. Thus they did. It is important to point out here, as did the sages, that the text is a little misleading. It would seem like everyone went out and slaughtered a lamb that night, but they actually followed the instructions given in that they waited until the 14th day of the first new moon of Aviv, now known as Nisan. Remember, Moshe gave all this information when he received it, not when it was due, and certainly not when it was past due. How could the children of Israel get the lamb on the 10th day and slaughter it on the 14th? And how can it say that they did what they were told if they didn't get this information until the 14th? Hopefully that made some sense. Casuto said, we now eagerly await the resumption of the story in the continuation of the biblical account. So what he's saying is, we're jumping forward. So now we jump ahead in the story to the night of the first Pesach. That's why it gets mixed up, because you don't realize there's half a month here before we jump into the next verse. So keep that in mind. Half a month is just now passed. Verse 29, between 28 and 29. And it came to pass at midnight, that would be between the 14th and the 15th, and Yahweh struck all the firstborn in the land of Mitzrayim, from the firstborn of Paro, his name is Paro, not Pharaoh, from the firstborn of Paro, Hebrew says Paro, doesn't say Pharaoh, from the firstborn of Paro, doesn't say from Paro down to, it says from the firstborn of Paro down to. From the firstborn of Paro, who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the slaves which were in the house of the pit. Literally, it says in the house of the pit. It is a Hebrew idiom. That were in prison, and all the firstborn of the animals. Onkelos, Sadia, and the Nahilta all explain that the house of the pit means prison. So I didn't just make that up. I'm just saying. Even Ezra said it was the latter half of the night. Okay, it says it's in the middle of the night, but I'm sure he knows something I don't know. Rashbam said it happened while the Yehudim were eating the Pesach lamb. That's, I think, possible. Rashi said that even the firstborn of the foreigners who lived in Mitzrayim died. Rashi also said that the Egyptian law of secession demanded that the firstborn son of the king had to secede. So he thought that Paro was spared so he could receive his punishment at the Reed Sea. Or maybe, perhaps, this proves that Paro had an older brother who died while his father was still on the throne. I'm just saying. Verse 30. And Paro rose up at night. The pseudo said this was an unroyal procedure. Okay. We move on with the verse. And he and all his servants, is what it should say. And Paro rose up at night, he and all his servants, and all Mitzrayim, and all of Egypt. And there was a great outcry in Mitzrayim. By the way, this was prophesied by Moshe in chapter 11, verse 6. So there's a great outcry by Mitzrayim, by everybody in it, by the whole country, for there was not a house in which there was no death. It is not likely that every house in Mitzrayim had a firstborn son. Some would only have daughters. Think about it. Their firstborn son would have died. Some would have died at birth. Some would have died during a battle. Some would have died during disease at some point in their life. They wouldn't have all had a firstborn. Onkelos said nothing about that. Rashi said that there was no firstborn son, that where there was no firstborn son, the oldest son was struck. Even Ezra said that verse meant the majority of the homes would be touched. Obviously not all of them, because he's realizing what I just said, and so it's just the majority. Well, actually, the Hebrew text says Bechor, the first, or the eldest. It's used for the same. It's used for both things, the first, the eldest. The eldest is the first. Where there was no firstborn son, the father would have been the first. The eldest, the greatest son. And thus, even if he was the 10th son of his parents, he was the first or the eldest son in his home. This is why someone died in every home. All right, so 31. And he cried out to Moshe and Aharon at night and said, Rise up, go from the midst of my people, both you and indeed the children of Israel, and go serve Yahweh as you have said. Now Rashi said that the words, as you have said, show that Paro agreed to every word spoken by Moshe and Aharon. The pseudo took literal the idea that Paro spoke directly to Moshe, which would have been a violation of Paro's words in chapter 10, verse 28, saying that Moshe would never see his face again. However, Moshe prophesied in chapter 11, verse 8, that Paro's servants would come and prostrate themselves before him. Thus, it is more likely that these words were received by a messenger reading a royal decree while lying prostrate face down on the ground. That's Moshe's prophecy coming true. Verse 32, Indeed, take your flocks and also your herds, as you have spoken, and go, and indeed you will have blessed thee. Notice I have translated very different than most. Rashi, even Ezra, Nachmanides, and Rashman all thought this verse meant that Paro was asking for prayer. Say what? What? No, he was not. He was not asking for prayer. He was saying, the sooner you guys are gone, the better. That's what he was saying. The pseudo points out that when Abraham first arrived in Mitzrayim, he blessed the Paro. He too thought Paro was asking for a blessing. In short, think of it this way. Abraham entered Mitzrayim. When he did that, he blessed the Paros, first thing he did. However, things had changed so much over the years that now the Paro thought his blessing would come from the Jews leaving. That's what we're supposed to be catching here. Verse 33. And the Mitzrayim pressed upon the people hastily to send them away from the land, for they said, We must save ourselves from death. Again, I've translated quite differently than most. Rashi misinterpreted this verse to say, We are all dead men. You really can't get that from the text. Saying that Paro was overwhelmed by the impact of the final plague. I'm sure he was, but not what the text says. Actually, they were just saying, we must save ourselves, or at least what's left of us. The pseudo translated the end, we are all dead men if we continue to enslave the Israelites. I don't really disagree with it, to tell you the truth. It's just that's not what's being said here. They're saying we must save ourselves from death. Yeah. 34. And the people lifted up their dough before it fermented, their kneading bowls wrapped up in a cloth on their shoulders. Rashi tried to make something super spiritual out of carrying the bread on their backs, but even Ezra, perhaps more rightly, points out that the beasts of burden were loaded down with the spoils of Mitzrayim. Thus, the people had to carry the bread. It could be that. Although, I'm telling you, I don't think I'd want to eat bread after been on a donkey's back for a day or 2 or 7. Just saying. Casuto points out that at first look, the details of the bread seem to be without purpose, but concludes that this narrative was to link the future observance of the Pesach celebration beyond the first night to the fact that they had no leavened bread for 7 nights upon leaving Mitzrayim. Okay, sounds good. 35. And the children of Israel did as Moshe said and asked from the Mitzrayim implements of silver and implements of gold and garments. Even Ezra said that each Yehudi asked according to their station in life, which would sound ludicrous on the surface. But he pointed out that when the people later brought their offerings to the tabernacle, only the princes brought jewels. Okay, or maybe only the princes served the upper crust of Mitzrayim, since they were the most educated and refined of the Israeli servants. Don't you think the upper crust would want to be served by the upper crust? I'm just thinking out loud here. 36. And Yahweh gave the people favor in the eyes of the Mitzrayim, and they asked, and they plundered Mitzrayim. Rashi and Onkelos both render Natzal, plundered, as in emptied, stating that this word is used elsewhere of people stripping themselves of their ornaments. Okay, I agree with that too. 37, and the children of Israel journeyed from Ramesses to Sukkota, about 600,000 men on foot, not including women and children. Rashi said that the children of Israel made it to Sukkota from Ramesses instantly, even though it's about 120 miles away. Okay, or maybe the story simply skips over the journey, kind of like we did earlier. 38, and a great mixed multitude went with them, and flocks and herds and very much cattle. Rashi believed this mixed multitude was the mixing of slaves from all over the known world, as do I. Even Ezra believed there were Egyptians who went with the Yehudim. Maybe. Sephardo made the mixed multitude out to be sheep and cattle. Oy vey. 39. And they baked the dough which they brought out of Mitzrayim, unleavened cakes, for it had not fermented. For they thrust away from Mitzrayim and were not able to linger. And they also made no provision for themselves. Nachmanides said that the bread baked in the sun, which I guess is possible. It is the Middle East. But why can we not believe that the Yehudim stopped at some point, made a fire, and baked the bread? Even Ezra said the bread had leavening in it, even though the scripture clearly states otherwise. Thus he said the Yehudim did not bake the bread until they arrived at Sukkota 7 days later. But that would mean that they disobeyed God's command to eat leavening each day of the feast. Just look at verse 15. Just saying. Kasuto said, when they reached their first halting place, in other words, he like I, believed that they stopped somewhere. They tried to prepare good bread, but they were unsuccessful. I don't know what he's basing they tried to make good bread but were unsuccessful on. All I really wanted to point out from it is that he, like I, both believe that they just stopped somewhere, made a fire, and tried to cook some bread. Well, obviously did cook some bread because it was unleavened bread. All right, verse 40. And the children of Israel dwelt in Mitzrayim 430 years. Now, there are many arguments concerning the fact that Bereshit, or Genesis 15:13, clearly says 400 years of captivity, and here we have 430. I believe that Kasuto renders the best explanation ever given on the subject, and I encourage you to purchase and read his commentary on Genesis and Exodus. And I say Genesis and Exodus because his books are called that. He doesn't use the Hebrew words. Verse 41. And it came to pass at the end of 430 years, and it came to pass in the selfsame day, all the hosts of Yahweh went out from the land of Mitzrayim. Okay. So now we're back to the interpretation. We're at verse 42, and I want to go through that word by word. Literally, it would say in English, night observance it to Yahweh, to lead out them from land Mitzrayim, it the night the this to Yahweh, observance to all children, Yisrael to generations then. You can kind of get the gist of it just from that. It says Leil, which is night. We usually say Lila, but remember, it's developed in the sentence. It's spelled properly. It's not wrong. Leil Shinu Rim, night watch. Observance, celebration. It's a night watch. It's an observance. Then it says he, which in Hebrew means, well, the Hebrew word he. In English means it or he. In this case, it means it. So it's a night of observance. It is a night of observance. This is La Yahweh. A night of observance to Yahweh. Then it says Lahot Ziyam, to bring out them. Remember, this is to go out, to go forth, They even use that of germination, because you plant seeds and then you get a whole bunch of, like you plant tomato seeds and you get a whole bunch of bushes full of lots of tomatoes. Germination, I guess is the right word for that. But remember, when you go out, you come somewhere. Just keep that in mind, because all of the Hebrew words work that way. Then it says me'eretz, from the land. So they're going out from the land of Egypt. They're going to come somewhere, the wilderness. But they're going out from the land. Mitzrayim. They're going out from Mitzrayim, from Egypt. And then it says who, which is either he or it. So in this case, it. Halayla, the night. Hazeh, the this. La Yahweh, to Yahweh. Then he says again, Shimurim, the observance, the observant. The night observance to Yahweh. Then it says, Lechal B'nai, to all of the children, Israel. All the children of Israel. Ledorotam, to their generations. Its age, its generation, its youth. Everyone that comes after you. So the translation of Shemot 12:42, Exodus 12:42. It is a night of observance to Yahweh, to lead them out from the land of Mitzrayim. This night is an observance to Yahweh. So what happens when you say the same thing twice? Makes it more important, doesn't it? To the children of Israel, to every generation. Many sages give long-winded or even short but not so sweet explanations of the term an observance to Yahweh. It is because, here's some examples. It is because he ended their punishment. It is, that's why we observe it. It is because God gave the Yehudim, saved the Yehudim rather, that night when he killed everybody else. That's why. What almost all explanations have in common is a stress on Yisrael. A stress really not so much on Yisrael as in me, myself, and I. It completely misses the simplicity of the statement, in that this is an observance of Yahweh. Not what he did for me, myself, and I, but who he is and what he can do and what he has done. Turn off your cell phones. Stop thinking about work. Stop arguing with your friends and family. Stop fuming over something some doofus said or did. This is a celebration and an observance to Yahweh. Make it about him and him alone. Take yourself out of the equation. You'll be happy you did. All right, so now we return to the law. Coming close to the end, and we return to the law. We're on Shemot, or Exodus 12:43. Literally in English, and he said Yahweh to Moshe and Aharon, this statute, the Pesach, all children, foreigner, not he consuming it. So we've had most of these words. Vayomer, it's to say, the signification is to bring forth, to shed light on the subject. Yahweh, that's God. El, that's to Moshe. Well, you know who Moshe is. He's Moses. And Aharon, and Aaron. Zot, these. Chukat, here's a new word, Chukat, statutes. That which is established or defined, spoken always of a single law or ordinance, whether it's a law of nature, which doesn't exist in Judaism, but I'm getting this from the Jewish dictionary. Yeah, take nature out of it. That's modern, that's westernized, that's Hellenized. No. God created everything. There is no nature. So everything is a law of God. You jump out of an airplane at 30,000 feet without a parachute, you're going to learn about God's law of gravity. If you have a car wreck, you're going to learn about God's laws of physics. Just saying. So this is a law, a statute, Ha Pesach. This is the statute of the Pesach. This is Kol, which is all men, all children. By the way, it's usually connected to son, and I get that, but it's used of the children of both genders all throughout the Bible. It's children. So no child, it's in singular, Nechar, no child of a foreigner, some stranger, some person from another country, somebody who's not a Jew. Lo yochal, not he will eat. He's not going to consume it. And of course, it's bo, which is in it. He won't eat the Passover lamb. So here's the translation. Yahweh said to Moshe and Aharon, this is the statute of the Pesach. So here's a law of the Pesach. No child of a foreigner shall consume it being the Pesach lamb. No child of or foreigner, no foreigner, doesn't really need to say child of a foreigner. Because if you're a foreigner, you're the child of a foreigner. You understand? So no foreigner shall eat the Pesach. Rashi said that a foreigner implies anyone who has alienated himself from God, both heathen and apostate Jew. That's the Jew, if you will. Nachmanides says it only applies to the apostate Jew. It is an interesting argument in that Judaism and the Jews' covenant belong only to the Jews. That said, Rashi is more likely to be right since God is obviously making a distinction between those in covenant and those who are not, which includes Jews and non-Jews, as evidenced by mixed multitude. So here's the law. No foreigner shall consume the Pesach lamb. So here's a note on that. Pesach is not an outreach program. It is for the observant Yehudim, the observant Jews and the proselytes only. How do we apply that? Well, one thing we can do is not invite friends, coworkers, and other unknowns to the celebration. That's one way. The other way is make sure we're celebrating it with Jews and proselytes, Jewish proselytes. Can't be proselytes in some other religion. Just saying. All right, done for the week. We love you and we thank you. Shabbat shalom.